On New Year's Eve 1998, 15-year-old Kirsty Bentley made a decision that would turn what should have been a celebration into a nightmare for her family. The teenager left her home in Ashburton, New Zealand, mid-afternoon, planning to take the family dog for a walk. It was a routine activity she had done countless times before, but this time would be different. Kirsty was last seen near a local church hall area, where witnesses reported seeing her with the dog. The next morning, New Year's Day, 1999, the family dog was found tied up at the same location, but it was lifeless. Kirsty herself was nowhere to be found, and her family's worst fears began to take shape. An extensive search operation was launched immediately, involving hundreds of volunteers, police officers, and search and rescue teams. For 17 agonizing days, the community of Ashburton rallied together, combing through farmland, forests, and waterways in desperate hope of finding the missing teenager alive. On January 17, 1999, the search came to a tragic end. Hunters discovered Kirsty's body in dense scrub, approximately 40 kilometers from where she had disappeared. She had sustained massive blunt force trauma to the head, and investigators quickly determined that this was no accident. Kirsty Bentley had been the victim of a brutal assault. The discovery sent shockwaves through New Zealand. Kirsty was found dressed in her school uniform, top and track pants, and her body had been carefully concealed under branches, suggesting her attacker had made deliberate efforts to hide the evidence. The secluded location where she was found indicated that whoever was responsible had intimate knowledge of the local area. Police launched one of the largest investigations in New Zealand's history, interviewing thousands of people and following up on countless leads. Early in the investigation, suspicion fell on various members of the community, including rumors that circulated about Kirsty's own father, though he was never charged and consistently denied any involvement. Investigators also looked into a local man who had been convicted of a similar crime in 1995, the assault and taking the life of a woman named Erica Murphy. The method of attack bore similarities to what had happened to Kirsty, but despite extensive investigation, no evidence could link him to the teenager's death. Adding to the mystery was information that emerged about Kirsty's final days. Family members revealed that she had mentioned possibly meeting a young man, someone they described as mysterious because none of them had ever met him or knew his identity. Despite extensive efforts to locate this individual, he was never found or identified. The investigation was hampered by the limited technology available in 1998. There were virtually no security cameras in the rural area. Mobile phone records were minimal, and forensic technology was far less advanced than it would become in later years. These limitations meant that investigators had to rely primarily on witness testimony and traditional detective work. In 2017, nearly 2 decades after Kirsty's death, police made a significant arrest. A 51-year-old man was taken into custody on suspicion of her slaying, raising hopes that the case might finally be solved. However, after extensive questioning and investigation, he was released without charges, leaving the case once again without resolution. The impact of Kirsty Bentley's case extended far beyond her immediate family and community. Her death sparked nationwide discussions about rural crime and child safety in New Zealand. The case received intense media coverage and even prompted parliamentary questions about police investigative procedures. In July 2022, more than 2 decades after Kirsty's death, New Zealand police demonstrated their continued commitment to solving the case by offering a $100,000 reward for information leading to a conviction. They launched a renewed public appeal, hoping that someone with crucial information might finally come forward. Police operations codenamed Operation Diver have continued sporadically over the years, with investigators following up on new tips and re-examining old evidence using modern forensic techniques. Despite all these efforts, Kirsty's case remains one of New Zealand's most notorious unsolved crimes. For Kirsty's family, the lack of resolution has been devastating. Her brother made a public appeal in 2021, pleading with anyone who might have information to contact police. The family continues to live with the pain of not knowing who took their daughter's life or why this senseless act of violence occurred. The case serves as a reminder that evil can strike even in the most peaceful communities, and that some questions may remain unanswered for decades. But investigators remain hopeful that advances in forensic science or a breakthrough in witness testimony might someday bring justice for Kirstie Bentley. On June 27, 2000, 16-year-old Molly Bish arrived at Comins Pond in Warren, Massachusetts, ready to begin another day as the local lifeguard. It was a job she loved, and she took her responsibilities seriously, ensuring the safety of swimmers at the rural pond. But this particular morning would mark the beginning of one of Massachusetts' most heartbreaking unsolved mysteries. The day before Molly's disappearance, her mother had noticed something unsettling. A man with a mustache, driving a white sedan, had been seen near the pond, watching the area with what seemed like unusual interest. The sighting was concerning enough that Molly's mother made a mental note of it, but neither of them could have imagined the significance it would later hold. When Molly failed to return home from her lifeguarding shift, her family immediately knew something was wrong. This was completely out of character for the responsible teenager who always kept in touch with her parents. A search of the pond area revealed her belongings still at the lifeguard station, but Molly herself had vanished without a trace. An extensive search operation was launched immediately, involving local police, state authorities, and hundreds of volunteers from the community. Search teams combed through the surrounding forests, dragged the pond, and followed up on every possible lead. Despite these massive efforts, no sign of Molly could be found. The investigation continued for months, with police pursuing every possible angle. The mysterious man in the white sedan became a key focus, particularly when investigators discovered that someone matching this description had been seen in the area on multiple occasions. But identifying this individual proved to be extremely challenging. In October 2002, more than 2 years after Molly's disappearance, a hunter made a significant discovery in the woods, approximately 5 miles from Comins Pond. Among the fallen leaves and underbrush, he found Molly's bright blue swimsuit, the same one she had been wearing on the day she vanished. The discovery of the swimsuit renewed hope that Molly might still be alive, but those hopes were crushed on June 9, 2003, when the same hunter found skeletal remains nearby. Dental records confirmed what everyone had feared. The remains belonged to Molly Bish. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the medical examiner was unable to determine an exact cause of death. However, investigators were convinced that Molly had been the victim of foul play. The location where her remains were found, deep in the woods and far from any populated area, suggested that she had been taken there against her will. The investigation took a significant turn when police identified a major suspect, Rodney Stanger, a man from Connecticut who owned a white car similar to the one described by witnesses. In 2009, investigators learned that Stanger had been known to fish near Comins Pond and hunt in the exact area where Molly's remains were discovered. Even more compelling was the fact that Stanger had moved to Florida shortly after Molly's disappearance, a timing that investigators found highly suspicious. When questioned about the case, Stanger's behavior and responses raised additional red flags for the investigators working the case. However, before charges could be filed, the case took a tragic turn. In 2014, Rodney Stanger took his own life, taking with him any answers he might have provided about Molly's fate. His death left investigators and Molly's family without the closure they had desperately sought. DNA evidence collected from Molly's swimsuit was tested extensively, but it failed to provide a match to any known suspects. In 2015, investigators conducted a familial DNA search through the CODIS database, hoping to identify relatives of the perpetrator. But this effort also proved unsuccessful. Despite the setbacks, the investigation has remained active. In 2019, the local community created an award in Molly's name to encourage anyone with information to come forward. An $85,000 reward continues to be offered for information leading to the arrest and conviction of her killer. Molly's parents have become advocates for missing children, lobbying for stronger laws and better resources for families facing similar tragedies. Their tireless efforts have helped keep Molly's case in the public eye and have provided support for other families dealing with missing loved ones. The case has been featured on numerous television programs, including 48 Hours, and continues to generate tips and leads from the public. Cold case detectives remain hopeful that advances in forensic science or new witness information will eventually provide the breakthrough needed to solve this case. For the Bish family, the loss of Molly represents not just the death of a beloved daughter, but the destruction of countless dreams and possibilities. The vibrant teenager who loved helping others and was planning to pursue a career in education will forever remain 16 in their memories. Molly Bish's case serves as a stark reminder of how quickly a normal day can turn into every parent's worst nightmare, and how some predators specifically target young people in positions of trust and responsibility. Hey everyone, it's here with a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you appreciate this content. On October 25th, 2015, 18-year-old Ebby Stepak made a frantic phone call to her brother that would be among the last communications anyone would have with her. The Little Rock, Arkansas teenager sounded disoriented and frightened, telling her brother, "I'm screwed up," as she drove around the city. What her family didn't know was that Ebby was carrying a devastating secret that may have led to her death. Just weeks before her disappearance, Ebby had confided to friends that she had been the victim of a violent group assault at a party. She claimed that 4 young men had subjected her to a horrific attack, an allegation that would cast a dark shadow over the investigation into her subsequent disappearance and death. The trauma of this alleged assault had clearly affected Ebby deeply. In the days leading up to her disappearance, those close to her noticed changes in her behavior. She seemed more anxious than usual and had become increasingly concerned about her safety. Despite the seriousness of her allegations, she was reluctant to provide authorities with specific details about her attackers. On October 27, 2015, Ebby's Volkswagen Passat was discovered abandoned in Chalamont Park in Little Rock. The car was unlocked, and her personal belongings were still inside, but there was no sign of Ebby herself. A security guard who found the vehicle waited 2 hours for police to arrive, a delay that would later be criticized as potentially hampering the early stages of the investigation. The discovery of Ebby's car marked the beginning of an extensive search operation. Police, volunteers, and search and rescue teams combed through the park and surrounding areas, hoping to find any trace of the missing teenager. Despite these efforts, no evidence of Ebby's whereabouts could be found. As the investigation progressed, police began to take seriously the allegations Ebby had made about being assaulted at a party. The 5 men she had named as her attackers were questioned extensively, but all denied any involvement in both the alleged assault and her disappearance. The investigation into these claims was complicated by Ebby's reluctance to formally press charges and her decision to delete many of her phone records before disappearing. For nearly 3 years, Ebby's fate remained unknown. Her family launched their own investigation efforts, hiring private detectives and conducting their own searches of areas they felt police might have overlooked. They criticized what they saw as inadequate police response to both the alleged assault and the disappearance investigation. On May 22, 2018, nearly 3 years after Ebby's disappearance, a city contractor working in Chalamont Park made a grim discovery. While performing routine maintenance on drainage systems, he found human remains in a culvert pipe located in the same park where Ebby's car had been abandoned. The remains were quickly identified as those of Ebby Stepak. The medical examiner determined that she had died around the time of her disappearance, and forensic evidence indicated that her death was the result of homicide. The discovery of her body so close to where her car had been found raised serious questions about the thoroughness of the initial search efforts. In 2016, police had officially classified Ebby's case as a homicide investigation, but the discovery of her remains provided concrete evidence of what investigators had suspected. The forensic examination revealed that Ebby had suffered injuries consistent with violent assault, confirming that she had been the victim of foul play. The investigation into Ebby's death was complicated by the passage of time and the deteriorated condition of the evidence. However, investigators remained committed to identifying her killer. In 2019, police indicated that they believed Ebby's death was the result of a planned attack, possibly connected to the alleged assault she had reported weeks before her disappearance. Throughout the investigation, several persons of interest were questioned, but no charges were ever filed. One of the men Ebby had named as her attacker later pleaded guilty to unrelated charges, but vehemently denied any involvement in her death. The lack of concrete evidence and the complicated circumstances surrounding the case made prosecution extremely difficult. The case highlighted serious issues within the criminal justice system's handling of sexual assault allegations and missing persons cases. Ebby's family accused police of not taking her initial assault allegations seriously enough and criticized what they saw as a delayed and inadequate response to her disappearance. In 2022, a Northwest Arkansas newspaper reported that police were still considering at least one suspect who remained alive and under investigation. However, no public action was announced, and the case remained officially unsolved. The story gained national attention when it was featured in a Netflix documentary series in 2023, bringing renewed visibility to Ebby's case and the broader issues it represented. The documentary focused on the challenges young assault victims face when seeking justice and the systemic problems that can occur in missing persons investigations. Ebby's case has generated significant legal action, including lawsuits filed by her family against the Arkansas 10th Judicial District regarding public record requests. The family has also been involved in discussions about legislative changes to improve how assault allegations and missing persons cases are handled. Despite the passage of nearly a decade since Ebby's death, her family continues to seek justice. They maintain that someone in the community knows who was responsible for taking their daughter's life and urge anyone with information to come forward. The case serves as a tragic reminder of how sexual violence can escalate to deadly consequences, and how the failure to adequately address such crimes can have devastating results. On November 1st, 2003, 14-year-old Charlene Downs was making her way through the town centre of Blackpool, England, when she vanished without a trace. The teenager had been distributing flyers with her mother earlier that evening and was last seen around 6:45 p.m. What her family didn't know was that Charlene had become entangled in a web of exploitation that would ultimately cost her life. Charlene had moved to Blackpool with her family in 1999, seeking a fresh start in the seaside resort town. However, the family soon discovered that beneath Blackpool's tourist-friendly exterior lay a darker reality. The town had become a center for organized exploitation of vulnerable young people, particularly teenage girls from troubled backgrounds. Lancashire police immediately suspected foul play when Charlene failed to return home. The investigation quickly revealed that the teenager had been part of a much larger pattern of abuse that had been operating in Blackpool for years. Court revelations would later expose that as many as 60 local girls had been systematically exploited by organized groups of men. The exploitation typically involved men offering food, cigarettes, or small amounts of money to vulnerable teenagers in exchange for sexual favors. Many of these interactions took place around fast food restaurants and takeaway shops in the town center, where predators would identify and groom their victims. Charlene had reportedly been subjected to multiple assaults by different men before her disappearance. In 2007, police charged 2 men in connection with Charlene's disappearance. One restaurant owner was charged with her elimination, while another man was charged with helping to conceal evidence. The trials that followed would expose the shocking extent of the exploitation network operating in Blackpool. During the court proceedings, it emerged that one of the defendants had admitted to disposing of something, but denied any involvement in taking Charlene's life. However, the prosecution's case was severely hampered by poor evidence collection and procedural errors that had occurred during the initial investigation. Both trials ended without verdicts in 2008, with the judge heavily criticizing the quality of police evidence presented to the court. The prosecution admitted that DNA testing had been inconclusive and that there had been significant labeling errors in the forensic investigation. No retrial was ordered, leaving both defendants free and Charlene's case unresolved. The failed prosecutions highlighted serious deficiencies in how the case had been handled from the beginning. Critics argued that police had downplayed the racial dynamics of the exploitation network and had failed to properly protect the victims who were willing to testify. The collapse of the trials was seen as a major failure of the justice system. Throughout the investigation and trials, Charlene's body was never found, making the prosecution's case even more difficult to prove. Without physical evidence or reliable witness testimony, prosecutors struggled to meet the burden of proof required for conviction. The absence of Charlene's remains also meant that the exact circumstances of her death remained unknown. In 2017, police made another arrest when a 51-year-old man was taken into custody on suspicion of Charlene's slaying. However, he was released just 2 days later, with no further action taken, suggesting that the evidence against him was insufficient to proceed with charges. The case received intense media attention, particularly regarding the revelations about systematic exploitation that emerged during the trials. Tabloid newspapers and broadcast outlets covered the story extensively, focusing on both the racial aspects of the exploitation network and the apparent failures of local authorities to protect vulnerable children. Campaign groups and child protection advocates used Charlene's case to highlight broader issues about how society responds to the exploitation of vulnerable young people. They argued that the investigation had been mishandled and that racial sensitivities had prevented authorities from adequately addressing the organized nature of the abuse. In 2023, a documentary titled Charlene Downs, Still Missing renewed public interest in the case. The film interviewed family members and experts, examining both the specific circumstances of Charlene's disappearance and the broader context of exploitation that surrounded it. A reward of £100,000 remains on offer for information leading to a conviction in Charlene's case. Police continue to investigate leads as they arise, but they decline to discuss details of ongoing investigative activities. The case remains officially open, though no significant developments have been announced in recent years. For Charlene's family, the lack of resolution has been devastating. They have not only lost their daughter, but have also been denied the closure that might come from knowing exactly what happened to her and seeing her killers brought to justice. Their continued campaign for answers serves as a reminder of the human cost of these unsolved cases. Charlene Downs' disappearance and the subsequent failed investigation have become emblematic of broader failures to protect vulnerable children from organized exploitation. Her case serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of taking such crimes seriously and the devastating consequences when the justice system fails to deliver accountability. On June 9, 1996, 25-year-old Melanie Hall was enjoying a night out with friends at Cadillac's nightclub in Bath, England. The young woman was engaged to be married and had her whole life ahead of her. As the evening wound down and her friends prepared to leave, Melanie was last seen outside the club. It would be 13 years before anyone would know what happened to her that night. Bath, with its Georgian architecture and reputation as a safe, cultured city, seemed an unlikely setting for a violent crime. But as Melanie's friends searched for her outside the nightclub and found no trace, it became clear that something terrible had occurred. Her fiancé reported her missing the next day, launching an investigation that would span decades. Initially, police suspected that Melanie might have been attacked by an individual known as the Batman Rapist, a predator who had been terrorizing the Bath area while wearing a Batman mask during his assaults. The timing and location of Melanie's disappearance seemed to fit the pattern of this dangerous individual, leading investigators to focus their early efforts on this connection. For more than a decade, Melanie's fate remained unknown. Her family lived with the agonizing uncertainty of not knowing whether she was alive or dead, while police followed countless leads that ultimately led nowhere. The case gradually grew cold as years passed without any significant development. In October 2009, 13 years after Melanie's disappearance, a motorist driving along the M5 motorway made a horrific discovery. Scattered along a slip road were plastic bags containing human bones. Dental records and DNA analysis confirmed what investigators had feared. The remains belonged to Melanie Hall. The forensic examination revealed the brutal nature of Melanie's death. She had suffered severe head injuries, including fractures to her skull, cheekbone, and jaw, indicating that she had been subjected to extreme violence. The fact that her remains had been placed in bags and dumped alongside a major highway demonstrated the calculated nature of her killer's actions. Blue rope had been used to secure the bags containing Melanie's remains, providing investigators with potential forensic evidence. However, despite extensive testing, the rope failed to yield DNA evidence that could identify her attacker. Key personal items, including her keys and identification, were missing from the scene, suggesting they had been taken by her killer as trophies. The investigation took on renewed urgency with the discovery of Melanie's remains. Operation Denmark was launched by Avon and Somerset Police, with investigators working to piece together Melanie's final hours and identify potential suspects. The case took on additional complexity when it was revealed that Melanie's fiancé had later become the victim of serial killer Levi Belfield. Though police found no evidence connecting Belfield to Melanie's death, John Cannon, a convicted rapist and killer, emerged as a potential suspect in the case. Some witnesses claimed they had seen a man matching his description with Melanie on the night she disappeared. However, Cannon was officially excluded from the investigation when it was confirmed that he was in prison at the time of Melanie's disappearance. Over the years, multiple arrests were made in connection with the case. In 2003, 2 men were questioned and released. In 2010, a 38-year-old man was arrested and bailed without charges. This pattern continued in 2013 with a 44-year-old suspect, and again in 2016 with a 45-year-old man. Despite these arrests, no charges were ever filed. In 2019, investigators made a significant breakthrough when they managed to extract a partial DNA profile from the blue rope that had bound Melanie's remains. This development led to a renewed public appeal for information, with police hoping that someone might recognize the specific type of rope or remember seeing it being purchased or used. The investigation also revealed that Melanie may have accepted a ride from someone driving a Ford Transit van or Fiesta on the night she disappeared. Her keys were found near her remains, suggesting that her killer may have used them to access her vehicle before disposing of them with her body. Despite decades of investigation and numerous arrests, Melanie's killer remains at large. The brutality of the crime and the calculated way her body was disposed of suggests that investigators are dealing with an extremely dangerous individual who may have committed other crimes. In 2019, police renewed their £50,000 reward offer for information, leading to a conviction in Melanie's case. They expressed confidence that DNA evidence would eventually lead to an identification, but acknowledged that they needed additional information from the public to move the investigation forward. The case has had a lasting impact on the city of Bath, shattering the community's sense of security and highlighting the vulnerability of young people enjoying nightlife in what should be safe environments. The long gap between Melanie's disappearance and the discovery of her remains meant that crucial evidence may have been lost and witnesses' memories had faded. For Melanie's family, the discovery of her remains brought both closure and renewed anguish. While they finally knew what had happened to their loved one, they were forced to confront the brutal reality of her final moments and the fact that her killer remained free. Their continued campaign for justice serves as a testament to their love for Melanie and their determination to see her killer brought to account. The case remains active, with detectives continuing to follow up on leads and hoping that advances in forensic science will eventually provide the breakthrough needed to solve this devastating crime. Between 1987 and 1991, the suburbs of Melbourne, Australia, things were gripped by terror as an unknown predator conducted a series of horrific attacks on young girls in their own homes. The perpetrator, who became known as Mr. Cruel, demonstrated a level of planning and sophistication that left investigators baffled, and the community living in fear. The first confirmed attack occurred in August 1987 in Lower Plenty, when an 11-year-old girl was subjected to a violent assault at knife point in her own home overnight. The attacker had carefully planned the invasion, cutting phone lines and ensuring that he could operate without interruption. His meticulous preparation and the brutal nature of the attack immediately set him apart from typical opportunistic criminals. In December 1988, Mr. Cruel struck again, this time in Ringwood, where he abducted a 10-year-old girl from her home. The child was held captive for 18 agonizing hours before being released, traumatized but alive. The extended duration of this attack allowed investigators to gather more information about the perpetrator's methods and psychology, but also demonstrated his increasing confidence and willingness to take greater risks. The attacks followed a distinctive pattern that revealed the perpetrator's careful planning and attention to detail. He always wore a mask to conceal his identity, and often blindfolded his victims to prevent them from seeing his face or their surroundings. He would cut phone lines before entering homes, ensuring that families couldn't call for help immediately, and he moved through houses with an unhurried pace that suggested intimate familiarity with the layouts. In July 1990, Mr. Cruel attempted another attack in Canterbury, targeting a 10-year-old girl. However, this victim managed to escape before he could complete his assault, providing investigators with their first opportunity to interview someone who had survived an encounter with the predator while still conscious and alert. The most tragic of Mr. Cruel's confirmed crimes occurred in April 1991, when he abducted 13-year-old Carmaine Chan from her home in Templestowe. Unlike his previous victims, Carmaine was never returned alive. Her body was discovered nearly a year later, and the medical examination confirmed that she had been strangled. This escalation from assault to taking a life marked a terrifying development in the case. What made Mr. Cruel particularly dangerous was his apparent intelligence and sophisticated planning abilities. Investigators believed he had military or intelligence training, given his ability to operate without leaving forensic evidence and his methodical approach to surveillance and attack. He seemed to study his victims' families for extended periods before striking, learning their routines and identifying the optimal times to attack. The perpetrator's ability to avoid detection was remarkable. Despite extensive forensic examination of crime scenes, he left virtually no physical evidence that could lead to his identification. Even with bloodhounds and advanced investigative techniques, police were unable to track him once he left the scene of his crimes. Over 4,000 tips were received by police during the active investigation period, but none led to the identification of Mr. Cruel. Investigators created detailed psychological profiles and released composite sketches based on victim descriptions. But these efforts failed to generate viable suspects. The perpetrator seemed to have an uncanny ability to blend into the community while planning and executing his attacks. One particularly disturbing aspect of the crimes was the level of psychological manipulation employed by Mr. Cruel. Victims reported that he would sometimes eat meals during the attacks, demonstrating a chilling calmness and control. He also made threats against victims' families, warning them of consequences if they attempted to identify him or failed to cooperate with his demands. The investigation into Mr. Cruel became one of the largest in Australian history, involving hundreds of detectives and support staff. Despite these massive efforts, the perpetrator seemed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. His ability to disappear without a trace after each attack suggested that he had carefully planned escape routes and possibly had access to multiple vehicles and safe houses. Some investigators theorized that Mr. Cruel may have committed additional crimes before his first confirmed attack in 1987. An unsolved abduction case from 1985 bore similarities to his later crimes, suggesting that he may have been active for a longer period than originally believed. The case generated intense media coverage throughout Australia, with newspapers dubbing the perpetrator Mr. Cruel after a headline that appeared in 1988 warning residents to "Beware Mr. Cruel." The name stuck and became synonymous with one of the country's most notorious unsolved criminal cases. In 2016, 25 years after Carmine Chan's death, Victoria Police demonstrated their continued commitment to solving the case by increasing the reward to $1 million Australian dollars for information leading to an arrest. This substantial reward reflects both the seriousness of the crimes and the ongoing impact they have had on the community. Despite the passage of more than 3 decades since the last confirmed attack, police still classify Mr. Cruel as potentially active. Advances in forensic science have provided new tools for analyzing old evidence, but without DNA samples or a viable suspect, these technological improvements have not yet yielded a breakthrough. Mr. Cruel remains one of Australia's most wanted criminals, and his case continues to generate tips and leads from the public. The hope persists that someone, somewhere, knows the identity of this dangerous individual and will find the courage to come forward with information that could finally bring him to justice. On the evening of December 5th, 1929, in a small apartment in Harlem, New York, 50-year-old Isidore Fink was preparing to settle in for the night when someone took his life in what would become one of the most puzzling locked-room mysteries in criminal history. Fink, a hard-working laundry delivery man, had no known enemies and lived a quiet, unremarkable life with his wife. That evening, Fink's wife was away from their apartment, leaving him alone in their modest home. Neighbors in the building reported hearing a loud thump sometime during the night, followed by a man's voice groaning what sounded like Ike, presumably a nickname for Isidore. However, despite these concerning sounds, no one reported seeing anyone enter or leave the building. The next morning, when Fink failed to appear for work, his building superintendent became concerned and went to check on him. When he tried to open the apartment door, he found it completely immovable. The door had not only been locked from the inside, but had also been secured with a wooden board that had been nailed across it at waist height, effectively sealing the apartment from within. After considerable effort, the superintendent managed to break down the door and force his way into the apartment. What he found inside defied all logical explanation. Isidore Fink was slumped in an armchair in the living room, clearly deceased. He had been shot twice in the left side of his chest and once in his left hand, with a .32 caliber bullet lodged in his head. The crime scene revealed no signs of a struggle or the presence of a second person. Fink's body showed no defensive wounds beyond the gunshot to his hand, and nothing in the apartment appeared to have been disturbed or stolen. Most perplexingly, there was absolutely no way anyone could have entered or exited the apartment after the shooting, given that the door had been nailed shut from the inside. Police investigators were immediately faced with a seemingly impossible scenario. The locked and barricaded door strongly suggested that Fink had taken his own life, but several factors made suicide highly unlikely. The gunshot wound to his hand appeared to be a defensive injury, as if he had tried to ward off an attacker. Additionally, the angle and location of the shots were inconsistent with what would be expected in a self-inflicted shooting. Furthermore, powder burns found on Fink's hands could have been consistent with either suicide or a close-range attack by someone else. However, family members and neighbors insisted that Fink had never been seen with a gun and had shown no signs of depression or suicidal thoughts. His life, while modest, had been stable and peaceful. As the investigation progressed, police began to explore the possibility that Fink might have had connections to organized crime. The late 1920s were the height of Prohibition, and New York was rife with bootleggers, gangsters, and various criminal enterprises. Investigators interviewed dozens of known criminals in the area, hoping to find some connection to the laundryman's death. Family members later hinted that Fink might indeed have had some involvement with underworld figures, though they provided no specific details. Some theorized that he could have been storing illegal goods in his apartment or serving as a lookout for criminal activities in the neighborhood. However, no concrete evidence ever emerged to support these suspicions. The case attracted significant attention from both police and the press, who were fascinated by the locked room aspect of the crime. Various theories were proposed to explain how someone could have killed Fink and then sealed the apartment from the inside, but none proved viable when examined closely. Some suggested that the killer might have knocked Fink unconscious, shot him, and then somehow escaped through a window before nailing the door shut. However, examination of the apartment revealed that all windows were locked from the inside and showed no signs of having been opened. Others proposed that an accomplice could have nailed the door shut from outside after the killer left, but this would have required the cooperation of someone with access to the building, and no such person was ever identified. The official investigation eventually reached a dead end, with police unable to determine whether Fink's death was suicide or homicide. The case was classified as unsolved, and despite periodic reviews over the decades, no new evidence has ever emerged to clarify what happened in that locked apartment. In 1997, the Detroit Jewish News revisited the case, describing it as a true locked room puzzle that still defied explanation, nearly 70 years after the fact. True crime writers and amateur investigators have continued to analyze the case, but the mystery of how Isidore Fink died in his sealed apartment remains unsolved to this day. Hey everyone, it's here with a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you appreciate this content. In January 2007, the international academic community was shocked by the mysterious death of French biophysicist Hugues de la Plaza in his San Francisco apartment. The 47-year-old scientist, who was the divorced son of a French marquis, had been visiting the United States for research purposes when his life came to a violent and puzzling end. On the night of his death, De La Plaza had spent the evening with friends before returning to his apartment around midnight. The next morning, neighbors were alerted by the sound of an alarm and discovered a scene that would baffle investigators for years to come. The scientist was found slumped in a kitchen chair, having suffered 3 fatal stab wounds, 1 to each side of his chest and 1 to his neck. What made the case extraordinary was not just the violent nature of De La Plaza's death, but the impossible circumstances surrounding it. Both the front and back doors of his apartment had been deadbolted from the inside, and all windows were locked with no signs of forced entry. There was absolutely no way anyone could have entered or left the apartment after the attack occurred. The crime scene itself presented numerous puzzling elements. De La Plaza was found barefoot with blood spattered across the walls of his kitchen. A knife blade had broken off in one of his wounds and was recovered from the floor beside his body. His computer and phones were still turned on, suggesting that his death had occurred suddenly and without warning. Medical examination revealed that De La Plaza had defensive bruises on his hands, indicating that he had fought against his attacker. However, he showed no signs of having been strangled or hanged, and toxicology tests revealed no evidence of drug use that might have impaired his ability to defend himself. Initially, the San Francisco Police Department publicly suggested that De La Plaza's death might have been a suicide, but this theory was met with immediate and fierce opposition from his family and French diplomatic officials. The French government became directly involved in the case, convening its own review of the evidence and challenging the American investigators' conclusions. French experts argued that the nature and location of the stab wounds made suicide virtually impossible. They pointed out that De La Plaza would have had to remain conscious and mobile after inflicting the fatal injuries in order to deadbolt the doors from the inside. The defensive wounds on his hands also strongly suggested that he had been fighting for his life against an attacker. The contradictory findings led to a diplomatic tension between French and American investigators. The San Francisco medical examiner ultimately classified the manner of death as undetermined, acknowledging that the evidence did not clearly point to either suicide or homicide. This classification satisfied neither the family nor the French officials, who remained convinced that De La Plaza had been the victim of foul play. Several theories emerged to explain the locked room mystery. Some investigators suggested that De La Plaza might have been killed elsewhere and his body moved to the apartment, with someone else sealing the doors afterward. However, blood evidence at the scene indicated that the attack had definitely occurred in the kitchen where he was found. Others proposed that the attack might have been the result of a lover's quarrel, with an intimate partner having access to keys or having been let into the apartment willingly. The theory suggested that after the attack, the killer could have locked the doors and escaped through some unknown means, possibly with the help of an accomplice. Private investigators hired by the family explored various possibilities, including personal vendettas related to De La Plaza's scientific work and even potential espionage connections. As a prominent biophysicist, he had access to sensitive research and international scientific networks that could potentially have made him a target for various hostile interests. Despite extensive investigation by both American and French authorities, no suspects were ever identified in De La Plaza's death. The case attracted international attention due to both the victim's prominence and the bizarre locked room circumstances, but it remained officially unsolved. De La Plaza's sister launched a foundation dedicated to reopening the case and seeking justice for her brother. She worked tirelessly to keep the investigation active and to challenge the official findings that suggested suicide might have been possible. As of 2022, the case remains unsolved, with the cause of death still officially listed as undetermined. The story has become a fixture in San Francisco true crime circles, serving as a prime example of how a potential crime can be hidden behind the seemingly impossible circumstances of a locked room. The case raises troubling questions about the limitations of forensic science and criminal investigation when faced with seemingly impossible scenarios. Whether Hugues de la Torre de la Plaza was the victim of an elaborate scheme or died under circumstances that simply cannot be explained continues to puzzle investigators and true crime enthusiasts alike. On New Year's Day, 1963, two bodies were discovered near the banks of Sydney's Lane Cove River that would launch one of Australia's most enduring and baffling mysteries. Dr. Gilbert Bogle, a 39-year-old scientist, and Margaret Chandler, a 29-year-old woman, were found dead in what appeared to be a peaceful riverside setting but the circumstances of their deaths would prove anything but peaceful. The scene that greeted investigators was both intimate and ominous. Margaret Chandler lay on a blanket near the water's edge, partially clothed with her nightdress and bra pulled up. Beside her, Dr. Bogle was found fully clothed, positioned as if he had been trying to help her or had collapsed while attempting to seek assistance. Both bodies showed obvious signs of distress. Their skin had turned blue and appeared bloated, suggesting some form of poisoning. Initial examination revealed that Chandler had vomited extensively before her death, while Bogle showed signs of disturbed bowels and had blood in his mouth. Most tellingly, both victims displayed chalk-white foam coming from their lungs, a clear indication of pulmonary edema typically associated with poisoning. However, despite these obvious symptoms, comprehensive toxicology testing failed to detect any known poison or drug in either victim's system. The relationship between the two victims quickly became a focal point of the investigation. Dr. Bogle was a respected scientist, while Margaret Chandler was married to a wealthy car racing team manager. The two had been engaged in an extramarital affair, which immediately cast suspicion on Chandler's husband as someone with both motive and opportunity to harm them. However, investigators found no evidence of physical assault on either body. Chandler showed no signs of sexual violence, despite her partially undressed state, and neither victim had any stab wounds, blunt force trauma, or other injuries that might indicate they had been attacked. The positioning of their bodies and their facial expressions suggested they had died relatively peacefully, despite whatever had caused their deaths. Police quickly focused their investigation on Chandler's husband, who certainly had reason to want both his wife and her lover out of the picture. The timing of their deaths, during a romantic rendezvous on New Year's Eve, seemed to suggest a crime of passion or a carefully planned revenge. However, despite intensive investigation, police were never able to establish any concrete evidence linking him to the deaths. An alternative theory emerged, suggesting that the deaths might have been accidental rather than intentional. Chandler worked in a laboratory setting where she could potentially have been exposed to various toxic substances. Some investigators theorized that she might have unknowingly carried a deadly toxin on her clothing or skin, which could have been transferred to Bogle during their intimate encounter. Decades later, in 2006, a Sydney medical journal proposed an entirely different explanation for the mysterious deaths. Researchers suggested that the victims might have been overcome by hydrogen sulfide gas that had built up naturally in the mud of the riverbank. According to this theory, environmental conditions on that particular night could have created a pocket of lethal gas that both victims inhaled while lying near the water. The hydrogen sulfide theory gained some credibility because it would explain both the lack of detectable poisons in the victims' systems and the specific symptoms they displayed before death. Hydrogen sulfide is known to cause exactly the type of pulmonary edema that both victims exhibited, and it can dissipate quickly from the body after death, making it difficult to detect in autopsy. However, even this scientific explanation left many questions unanswered. If environmental gas had killed them, why were no other people in the area affected? Why did their deaths occur at exactly the same time? And why were there no reports of unusual odors or other environmental signs that might have warned them of danger? The case generated enormous media attention throughout Australia, with newspapers and television programs following every development in the investigation. The combination of an illicit affair, mysterious poisoning symptoms, and the complete absence of any detectable poison created a perfect storm of public fascination. Local legends even developed around the case, with some people claiming that the deaths were the result of supernatural intervention. According to these stories, a teenage girl who had died in the area years earlier had cursed the spot, and her ghost was responsible for the deaths of anyone who used the location for romantic purposes. In 2006, more than 40 years after the original investigation, a coroner's inquest was reopened to re-examine the evidence using modern forensic techniques. However, even with advances in toxicology and pathology, the inquest was unable to determine a definitive cause of death. The official ruling remained unknown cause, acknowledging that despite decades of investigation and scientific analysis, the deaths of Gilbert Bogle and Margaret Chandler could not be satisfactorily explained. Australia's Channel 7 produced a documentary about the case, and public interest has remained high, even 60 years after the deaths occurred. The case has become emblematic of how some mysteries can persist, despite the best efforts of both law enforcement and scientific investigation. For the families of both victims, the lack of resolution has been particularly difficult. Without a clear understanding of what caused the deaths, they have been unable to find closure or peace. The case serves as a reminder that even in our modern age of advanced forensic science, some questions may never be answered satisfactorily. On September 21, 2001, British tourists enjoying a peaceful afternoon of fishing along the Thames near London made a discovery that would expose one of the most disturbing aspects of international human trafficking and ritual violence. Floating in the murky waters, they spotted what appeared to be the torso of a young child, severed from both head and limbs in a manner that immediately suggested this was no ordinary crime. The victim, who investigators would later name Adam, since his true identity remained unknown for years, was estimated to be between 4 and 8 years old. The condition of the remains told a horrifying story of deliberate mutilation carried out with what appeared to be ritual precision. The child's head and all 4 limbs had been removed using techniques consistent with traditional African muti practices, ritual killings performed for supernatural purposes. When forensic pathologists examined the remains, they discovered evidence of an even more disturbing sequence of events leading to the child's death. Toxicology tests revealed that Adam had been given a large dose of toxic plant material commonly used in traditional African medicine. Additionally, medical examination showed that his blood had been deliberately drained through a shallow cut across his throat while he was still alive. The child was found wearing an orange girl's swimsuit bottom and a t-shirt, clothing that provided few clues about his identity or origins. However, advanced forensic analysis of his bone structure, hair, and other physical characteristics strongly suggested that he was of West African origin, specifically from the region around Benin City, Nigeria. The discovery of Adam's remains launched one of the most extensive missing persons investigations in British history. Police appealed to communities throughout Africa and Europe, hoping to identify the child and trace how he had come to be in London. The investigation revealed disturbing connections to international child trafficking networks that operated between West Africa and major European cities. For 10 years, Adam remained unidentified, despite intensive efforts by both British and Nigerian authorities. Police worked with international organizations, religious leaders, and community groups to try to establish his identity and trace his movements before his death. The case highlighted the vulnerable position of trafficked children, who often exist completely outside official records and documentation. In 2011, a breakthrough finally occurred when DNA analysis and investigative work by Nigerian authorities identified the victim as Ikpomwosa Osemwegi, also known as David, who had disappeared from Lagos in 2000. The identification confirmed investigators' suspicions about his Nigerian origins, but raised new questions about how a child from Lagos had ended up as a ritual sacrifice victim in London. The investigation into Adam's death revealed the existence of sophisticated trafficking networks that moved children from Africa to Europe for various forms of exploitation, including ritual violence. These networks operated with international scope and professional organization, making detection and prosecution extremely difficult for law enforcement agencies. Evidence gathered during the investigation strongly suggested that Adam had been brought to London specifically for the purpose of ritual killing. The careful preparation of his body, the use of traditional toxins, and the method of blood drainage all pointed to someone with extensive knowledge of West African spiritual practices who believed that the child's death would provide supernatural benefits. The case attracted intense media attention and prompted parliamentary questions about child trafficking and protection policies in the United Kingdom. Members of Parliament raised concerns about how easily trafficked children could be moved across international borders without detection, and about the inadequacy of systems designed to protect vulnerable minors. Despite the extensive investigation and eventual identification of the victim, no suspects were ever arrested or charged in connection with Adam's death. The international nature of the crime, combined with the secretive practices of both trafficking networks and ritual practitioners, made it extremely difficult for investigators to identify specific perpetrators. The case also highlighted the cultural challenges faced by law enforcement when investigating crimes rooted in traditional spiritual beliefs. While police treated Adam's death as a heinous act of violence, they had to navigate complex questions about religious freedom and cultural sensitivity while pursuing justice for the young victim. New Scotland Yard issued statements describing Adam as the victim of a ritual killing, but acknowledged that the investigation had not led to any arrests. The failure to identify and prosecute those responsible for his death became a source of significant frustration for both investigators and the public. The discovery of Adam's remains also sparked broader discussions about the exploitation of vulnerable children in various forms of traditional medicine and spiritual practices. Child protection advocates used the case to highlight the need for better international cooperation in combating trafficking networks and protecting children from ritual violence. Years after the discovery of his remains, Adam's case continues to serve as a stark reminder of the darkest aspects of international crime. His death represents not just the loss of an innocent life, but also the failure of multiple systems designed to protect children from exploitation and violence. The case remains officially open, with authorities continuing to hope that new information might eventually lead to arrests and prosecutions. However, the passage of more than 2 decades since Adam's death has made it increasingly unlikely that those responsible will ever be brought to justice. For investigators who worked on the case, Adam's death represents one of the most disturbing crimes they encountered in their careers. The combination of ritual violence, international trafficking, and the exploitation of a vulnerable child created a case that challenged both their investigative skills and their emotional resilience. The story of Adam serves as a powerful reminder that behind every unsolved case is a real person whose life was cut short by violence, and whose death demands justice even when that justice seems impossible to achieve. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching this compilation of international mysteries and locked room puzzles.